James, your first book, A Higher Loyalty, came out a couple of years ago. I read it, I enjoyed it. It was so revelatory to my mind. Why did you decide that you wanted to write a follow-up?
Actually, my family convinced me to do it. I wasn't ever intending to write another nonfiction book, and they convinced me that people really need to understand why the Department of Justice in the States mattered so much, how much it had been hurt, and the importance of restoring its values. So I wrote it for non-lawyers, non-historians, hoping to explain to them why this institution matters so much.
Because it is an indictment of America at the moment, I guess, that you even have to do that, that you even have to talk about why the rule of law is important.
Yeah, I think that's right. We're going through an unbelievably painful civic education in the United States, where people are having to be reminded of what the heart of this republic is, and the rule of law is obviously at the center of that. So yeah, I wish it weren't necessary. I wish the values hadn't been eroded at the Department of Justice in a way they hadn't been since Watergate, but it needed to be said.
You write in, or The Guardian have reviewed your book, and they say it's a paean to American institutions, a heartfelt case for fealty to the rule of law and the Constitution. And that made me think back to a TV series back in the 1970s, which I'm sure you were familiar with, The Paper Chase, starring John Houseman, which anybody who's seen that will know what I mean. It was almost a series that promoted law to citizens and made law accessible. In a way, you're trying to explain the same thing here, why Americans need to understand the relationship between law and the Constitution.
I think that's right. Without the terrifying voice of John Houseman, I do want to, through telling stories that I hope will hold attention because they're cool stories, illustrate again for non-experts why it matters so much that truth be at the center of the justice system, why it matters so much that our leaders are transparent, and why it matters so much that they foster the trust of the American people. Again, in an ideal world, you would need to say these kinds of things, but it needs to be said. And I very much hope, especially young people, will read it. I dedicated it to young people who want to change the world for the better. And I hope this will be a bit of a guide for them, a bit of a tool chest for them.
Transparency is a word you just mentioned there, and it is a word that permeates the book. Why is that so important, both in politics and the law?
Because you can't gain people's trust without them having an understanding of what it is you're doing and why. If government becomes a mystery to people, they're very easily misled, as so many millions have been in the United States, by a fog of lies, by a demagogue who lies to them. And so showing them the working of the government as a whole and the institutions of justice in particular is essential to maintaining their trust.
You talk a lot, obviously, about the Department of Justice, the Attorney General, which, from a British point of view, is really interesting because it's such a different system. We don't really have politics involved with the law in this country. Although the Attorney General is a politician, that they swear an oath to obey the rule of law, and politics shouldn't come into it. But there are so many more political appointments in the judicial system in the United States. Do you think that that is a healthy thing?
I think on balance it is, although every 2 generations or so in America it seems to get out of balance. I think it's a healthy thing in theory for a president to run for office saying, I want to emphasize the following aspects of justice. I want to protect children. I want to address environmental crimes, and then have an appointee of his or hers, someday I hope, that carries out those policy promises to the American people. That's a healthy thing. I worry that if we had an entirely civil service justice system in the United States, we would be too separated from the will of the people. But there's danger that comes with that. And the danger we've seen in the last 4 years is that the political can become everything. And decisions about right and wrong and who to put in jail can be driven not by facts and law, but by politics. That's the flip side of the system. That's why it's important to remind ourselves there are special obligations that come with being a political steward of an essentially apolitical function, which is justice.
But do you think the Constitution has really kept up with the times, and that has the Constitution been able to cope with someone like Donald Trump as president and the kind of decisions that he's made?
I do. I think it's been the mother of all stress tests for our Constitution and our civil society. This was the great fear of the founders of the United States, the demagogue who would ride a whirlwind of lies. And we've had that for 4 years. And the system, believe it or not, I believe has held. The system has held. The institutions have held. The rule of law has held. It has been ugly, but it's been an incredible stress test. I think the design works, but it gets tested. It gets tested to its absolute limits by this person, which was the greatest fear of our founders.
What should the relationship be like between the director of the FBI and the president? Because clearly you had a very, very different relationship with Barack Obama than the one that you briefly had with Donald Trump.
It ought to be captured by a sentence that seems inconsistent. The FBI should be in the executive branch. That is, it makes sense to me that the FBI director reports up to the president through the attorney general, but never entirely of the executive branch. That is, spiritually and culturally, it has to maintain a sense of independence. And the American people decided they wanted it that way after Watergate, when they learned that the FBI director, J. Edgar Hoover, had been having drinks with the president of the United States, then Richard Nixon. There have been all kinds of abuses. And so the American people through Congress said, we want separation. And so we'll pass a symbolic 10-year term for the director of the FBI. So that role spans any presidential terms as a signal that we want separation. And all of that was trashed, or attempted to be trashed, at a tiny table in the middle of the green room at the White House residence at the end of Donald Trump's first week in office, when he looked across the table to me and said he wanted loyalty. He wanted me not just to be in the executive branch, he wanted me to be in his pocket, in his team. And that's unhealthy.
You never had a one-to-one dinner with Barack Obama, did you? And when Donald Trump invited you to dinner, you say in the book that you thought there would be a group of people there, but it turned out to just be a dinner à deux. Just take us through what happened that evening.
Yeah, you're right. I assumed it was going to be a group dinner because Barack Obama, George W. Bush, two very different people, would never, ever have dinner alone with the FBI director. No president would since Watergate. And again, because of the need for that separation between the chief executive authority and the chief investigative authority, because the FBI may have to, of course, in this case we did, investigate people close to the president and even the president himself. And so I assumed I was walking into a group dinner of the national security leadership team, which makes sense for a new president to meet his new team, and saw this tiny table in the middle of the green room, the ornate room on the ground floor of the residence, where all the furniture had been pushed to the sides. And in the center sat this table for two. And my stomach dropped in that moment. And as I sat down across from him, I knew what it was about immediately when he asked me, what did I want to do? Meaning, did I want to stay in my job? Which was odd because he had already 2 or 3 times asked me to stay in the job. And it was clear to me that this was about him getting something in exchange for me staying on as FBI director. And what he wanted was for me to be his FBI director, not America's.
Did you, at any point then, think about calling the dinner to a halt and saying that this is not appropriate?
Yes, I did. My mind was racing, trying to figure out what to do, because I had all kinds of conflicting things going on in my head. First of all, I want to protect the FBI and its independence. But at the same time, I'm assuming I'm going to be here leading the FBI and protecting the institution for another 6 years at that point. And so I can't be at war with the President of the United States. And so how do I do both of those things sitting at the table, protect the independence, protect myself, and not have a war with the president? And I tried different ways to bend a little bit. Later in the conversation, I told him he would always get honesty from me when he asked for loyalty again. And then he said, yeah, that's what I want, honest loyalty. And I paused and said, that you'll get from me, convincing myself, which is always easy to do, that I had said enough to make clear to him, I'm not on your team. And in a way, even though I thought that I had avoided a war with him at that moment, I was a dead man walking at that point, because I had refused to give him the unqualified pledge of loyalty. But it was an exhausting conversation for that and other reasons.
Was it one of those conversations where you wanted him to do all the talking and you thought, well, the least said by me, the better?
Yeah, which is actually one of the easy things with Donald Trump because he never stops talking. And the hard thing for me, I don't mean this to sound facetious, I was really trying to remember what he was saying because I knew I would need to make a record of it. And that's very, very hard to keep that plate spinning. I got to remember the words, I got to remember the words while keeping the no war plate spinning and keeping the protect the FBI's independence plate spinning. So the less I had to talk, the better.
I mean, I guess it might have been an idea to record the conversation on your phone, but of course, recording things in the White House doesn't have a happy history.
It does not. And I didn't bring a phone. You're not supposed to have phones in that part of the building. But afterwards, as you know, he intimated that he had taped me, which I honestly was delighted to hear because I knew what would be on the tapes. And I actually still don't know the answer to that question, whether he taped me or not.
So how long was that before he did fire you?
That was the end of January of 2017. He fired me at the beginning of May. Thereafter was a series of encounters where it became clearer and clearer to me that he really didn't like me. And I thought that's a healthy thing because that's a cold front that will settle and enforce the distance that the American people have wanted between the FBI and the president. And so he won't invite me for dinner. He won't want me to hang out with him. That's a healthy thing. This sounds strange in hindsight. It did not occur to me that he might fire me. I really felt like I had job security by virtue of the 10-year term and by virtue of the fact that I was leading an investigation into whether people associated with his campaign had conspired with the Russians.
And what was your relationship with the Department of Justice like and the Attorney General? Presumably that was rather different from Attorney Generals under, or Attorneys General, I should say, under Barack Obama.
It was very different. It obviously didn't last long. The Attorney General at that point was a guy named Jeff Sessions, who had been a US Senator and the first senator to endorse Donald Trump, so a very political person. We didn't have much of a relationship. He recused himself, that is, stepped aside from the Russia investigation and left the room when Donald Trump kicked him out in order to talk to me alone, to pressure me to drop a case involving his national security advisor. So I didn't have much of a relationship there. And a new deputy attorney general, the #2 position, came in shortly before I was fired. And I thought I had a fine relationship until I found out the guy had written a fraudulent memo at Trump's request to try to justify my firing. So not great. And they did not stand between the FBI and the president the way I explicitly asked them to. I told the attorney general, I can't be alone with him. You have to be between me and Donald Trump. And he didn't do that.
How many of your team in the FBI did you bring into your confidence on this and your relationship with the president? Because I suppose from your point of view at that point, the worst thing that could happen was for there to be leaks, for there to be rumors in the media about your relationship. But so presumably that meant that you couldn't share this with many people.
That's right. Probably the top 5 or 7 people who I met with first thing every morning understood what I was dealing with, read copies of the memos that I wrote after the meetings, in part because I needed them to know about the facts of my encounters with the president because they might implicate criminal investigations, and they did. But we kept it very tight, and there was no word during my time with Donald Trump about any friction.
Now, one thing you do in the first book, and indeed in this book, is to try and explain in great detail your thinking about all the Hillary Clinton investigation just before the 2016 election. Where you're damned if you do and you're damned if you don't, isn't it? And you were clearly going through tortuous thought processes, trying to decide what to do. Do you, as you sit here now, 4 or 5 years on, do you think that you did the right thing? Do you think if you'd done anything different, things might have turned out differently?
I don't think so. As you said, I talked about it in great detail in the first book, and I cover it more quickly in the second book. I actually wanted to leave it out entirely because it's a bit of a nightmare I can't wake up from still. But I wanted to touch it in the second book because it explains the importance of transparency and also explains some of the narrative around dealing with Trump. But yeah, I even looking back with hindsight, we had choices that were terrible. And I tried and still think I succeeded in choosing bad and not worse. I wish I hadn't been involved at all, but even if I could travel back in a time machine, I can't make a decision as FBI director based on politics. Even if I could foresee the horror that is Donald Trump, I couldn't make a decision on that basis. I had to make a decision on the facts before me and the values of the institution I led. And so I know it mystifies some folks, but even if I could go back in time, I'd have to choose bad, which is sure bad, but not choose worse. But we were,
Because Hillary Clinton to this day believes that you gifted the election to Donald Trump.
yeah, I've heard that. I don't know whether she still thinks that. There's some experts have written that the way in which undecided voters all broke for Donald Trump this time, which was the same as what happened last time, makes it less, and I was home in my pajamas this time, so it makes it less likely that there really was an impact by our decision. But I don't know. I sure hope not, but it doesn't change how I think about it. It increases the pain, but it doesn't change how I think about the decision. We had to do what we did. I'm sorry.
You said you didn't vote in that election. Did you vote in this one?
I sure did. And
Can I hazard a guess?
I think I wore a Biden-Harris shirt to the polls and put on social media a picture of myself in it, something I never imagined I would be doing. But I thought it was really important to speak out. If I didn't, I don't love, I'm having a delightful time talking to you, but I don't love this phase of my life. It's going to end on January 21st, and that'll be a good thing. But between getting fired and now, I had to speak out.
See, that's interesting because your critics accuse you of having a giant ego, that you love all the attention. And yet are you effectively saying that after January the 21st, you're going to become a private citizen and not do this sort of thing anymore?
Yes, that's right. I hear that stuff all the time, and that's understandable. They just don't know me. And so I will be it'll be a different phase of my life come January 21. And I'm excited about that. I'm going to teach at the university level, and you will not see me on social media. You will not see me in the media at all.
But you must miss the FBI life. I mean, that must have been the most amazing experience. Even though you didn't do it for as long as you wanted to, you could probably dine out on anecdotes from that time, even though you're not allowed to tell anecdotes, I imagine. You could probably dine out on that for decades to come. And anything after that must feel a bit of a come down in terms of adrenaline, let alone anything else.
Yeah, that's a keen observation. I don't miss the icky political people in Washington. I miss the people and the work at the FBI. I loved being there and trying to do good for people who needed us. And so I do miss that. And it was because I didn't think I was going to get fired. Getting fired was like being pushed off a bullet train. And all of a sudden I'm standing on the platform, the train is long gone. It took me a while to adjust to that, both the change in pace, because that job is all consuming, and not being able to affect events that touched on the FBI's life. That was a hard adjustment. I've gotten used to it now. Things have slowed down, and so I'm I think in a healthier place that way. But yeah, I miss the work and I miss the people. They are really good people, humans with all the great things that humans bring and some of the bad things that humans bring, but really an amazing group of people.
This is a question I never thought I would have to ask, but 4 years on from the election of Donald Trump, I have to. Do you think far-right extremism in the US is a greater danger to the country than Islamist terrorism?
Yes. And I think my successor as director of the FBI, Christopher Wray, has publicly testified that that's the single greatest threat that the FBI faces in the United States.
And in your time, I mean, obviously there were concerns, but they must have doubled or trebled or quadrupled over the past couple of years.
Yeah, the threat has slowly risen as Donald Trump and those around him have withdrawn the control rods. America's always had a radioactive stew of racist, conspiracy-minded, misogynist people oriented towards violence. We've always had that in this country, but we've managed over generations to contain it inside a containment building, as you would with a nuclear waste pile, and put control rods down into it, which were cultural. And that calmed the radiation. And over the last 5 years, Donald Trump and those around him have pulled the rods out with signals and dog whistles, and sometimes explicitly. And the radiation started to bang around inside the building, bang around, and you saw it bust out of the containment building a week ago today at the US Capitol. And so one of the missions for our country There are two big missions before us. One is rebuild the containment building and push that radioactive goo back into that building and push the control rods down into it. We will never get rid of it in America, certainly not in our lifetimes. That's the first mission. The second is to try to find a way to help those people, millions of them in the United States, who are victims of this demagogue's lies, who are caught in a fog of lies, help them move out of that fog. And that's in a way, much harder thing to do and takes more time, because I've prosecuted fraud cases where fraudsters plead guilty and their victims come to their sentencing to speak up for them. Because the hardest thing in the world to do is to admit that you've been fooled, you've been defrauded. And there are tens of millions in the United States in that position right now. We have to help them move out of that fog.
Where was the FBI last Wednesday on Capitol Hill? In terms of deploying FBI officers, is that a decision that the director makes, or is there any political influence on that decision?
Well, there shouldn't be any political influence, but I wouldn't expect to see FBI personnel there securing the Capitol in the main. The FBI is an investigative agency with a small elite tactical capability, primarily in the hostage rescue team. But the FBI doesn't do civil disturbance. What the FBI does is gather information about threats like that and share it, ideally, with those who have the troops and the batons and the shields to protect institutions. And that's the big question for me, is how did we as a country fail to protect this hill of ours from a threat that seems blindingly obvious? And it frustrates me watching those images. I was angry watching those images and sickened, angry as a former law enforcement official. And I want to know the answer to that. Why did we fail? It's a failure on the level, in my view, with 9/11. We need to know why.
And in terms of the inauguration next week, there's a lot of talk about 20,000 National Guards officers being deployed in Washington, D.C., a lot of speculation about what could happen in state capitals all over the country. What role does the FBI have in protecting those institutions next Tuesday?
It's primarily an investigative and information sharing, intelligence sharing function. And it's an enormous responsibility, because the FBI is the agency that knits together all levels of law enforcement in the United States. So the FBI's job is to gather information, everything they can find, squeeze their sources, squeeze their court-ordered interception capabilities, and then push that information out to those responsible for securing the site. Now, that I've been involved in securing 2 inaugurations when I was in government, and this for Americans is the Super Bowl of security. And so it's something we know how to do. We have the capability to lock down an area like that, and I'm reasonably confident it will be done well. But you don't ever want to convince yourself we've done enough because of the nature of this threat. This isn't Islamists looking to sneak into our country. The threat here comes from people who are spread all over the United States and look like everybody else, walk like everybody else, and finding them and disrupting them if they're planning something is challenging. So you don't want to go to sleep on it and convince yourself, oh, this is what we do well.
Do you worry, though, that the more that people talk about this, whether it's law enforcement agencies or whether it's the media, that it almost inevitably makes it happen, that more and more people know that this might happen, and people who are minded that way might think, okay, well, I'm going to join in this as well. It kind of is ramping it up a bit, isn't it?
Maybe. I actually think the stronger case is the other way, that making clear 2 things: that we have the capability to secure our government offices, and second, that we are going to find and arrest everybody who participated in the attack last Wednesday. Those messages actually cut the other way. I think it's really important, and the FBI, this is something the FBI does extremely well, that we are relentless in tracking these people down. My advice to them in the States has been, if you were part of committing a crime at the Capitol, you ought to turn yourself in, because we're going to find you. And that's already happened. And so I think the message, there is a counter message, but I think the overwhelming message is, you try this, we're going to get you. You try this, we're going to defeat you.
At the 2017 inauguration, I was in Washington, D.C., commentating on it for LBC. And as Donald Trump was making his inauguration speech, which I expected him to make a presidential speech, I mean, how naive and innocent I was 4 years ago. And I said, right at the end of it, well, I should be summing up what he said now, but I'm not going to, because that was a speech that Benito Mussolini could have made in terms of style rather than necessarily substance. How much of an extremist do you think Donald Trump is compared to what you thought he was when he was elected?
Well, he's every bit as bad a person as I thought he was. And I'm quoted in a media source here today, having told the director of national intelligence back then that the American people just elected a really bad person as president of the United States. And that's hard for people to get their head around. People who don't have encounters with evil people have trouble imagining it. It's even harder when you talk about the president of the United States. And so I knew the nature of the character we were dealing with. What I really didn't fully grasp is that he's not only a really bad guy, he's a complete nihilist, meaning nothing matters except getting me in this moment what I want. I will burn anything down. I will destroy anything in this moment if it gives me what I need. I don't think I've fully grasped that aspect of his badness. And so it's probably worse than even I expected.
It seems to me, as somebody who loves the United States, I love going there. I haven't been since 2017. But America's got a decision to take now. It can go one of two ways. This era of division can be perpetuated, or the new president does something quite dramatic to bring the country together. Do you think that dramatic thing could be to, on day one, pardon Donald Trump? Do you think that would pacify his supporters?
I don't know. I think Joe Biden's mission has to be to heal the country, both literally, because so many Americans are dying every day from the coronavirus, and spiritually, to find a way to coax, to lure those people caught in the fog of lies. And I keep saying it that way because you don't change minds of the defrauded by shouting at them. You have to find ways to let them tell a story to themselves that doesn't embarrass them, that moves them away. I think he most importantly does that by demonstrating empathetic, competent leadership, which is what I think he does naturally. The question of pardoning Donald Trump, I don't know exactly what that will get him with Donald Trump's supporters, in part because if they're caught in the fog, they'll realize that accepting a pardon is an admission of guilt. And so Joe Biden just tricked their man into admitting he's guilty or something. I think it's important that we not give Donald Trump center stage in American life for the next 3 or 4 years, which is why it's a close question. But if I were deciding it, I would prefer not to prosecute him and give him that center stage in Washington as part of an ongoing United States versus Trump drama. But I think it's going to be most important for the president to take those millions trapped in the fog and get them focused on other things, on making the country better, on improving our economy, these kinds of things, and let them tell themselves a story that gets them away from it. And I think I'm an optimist. I think we are at an inflection point in America that makes me think we're going to be okay. We needed something to reset us, and I didn't want it to be a tragedy, but it has been. And I hope and think it's reminding the American people, and I see it in the public opinion polls, that there is something that we all agree on. We all agree on a set of principles that are laid out in our Constitution, and this stuff goes way too far.
Well, James, it's been an absolute pleasure talking to you about your book and much else besides. Thank you very much for joining us, and the best of luck in your new career. You are going to be the next John Houseman.
The world is not ready.
And this is James's book. It's called Saving Justice, Truth, Transparency, and Trust. Thank you very much indeed.